This video explains how to find the domain and range of rational functions using a TI-83 graphing calculator. We'll go over two examples. For the first rational function, let's consider x squared minus 2x plus 1 over x squared plus 2x plus 1. Now, one thing important to remember about graphing a rational function is that you always need to put an extra set of brackets around the top of your fraction and around the bottom of your fraction. So, brackets around the numerator, brackets around the denominator. So when I graph it, I see a graph that looks like this. Now it looks like the graph goes towards some value, skips some number, and then starts again. And the graph has nothing until we reach some point around here, the minimum point. So in order to find the domain, it actually helps us to look at the equation. If we factor the bottom of the equation, we get the asymptotes. So x equals -1 is a vertical asymptote. So we can see that on the graph that if we're at a value of x is -1, that's a line that the graph gets really close to. It's also a line that the graph can never cross. And the domain is always x is not allowed to be the vertical asymptote. So the domain is very closely related to the asymptotes, but the range is much harder to find. So we have to use the graphing calculator to find out what is the smallest value that this graph is going to be. And I think I can see that there's a low point down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my calculate menu by pressing second trace, and I'm going to choose minimum 3. Now I need to give a left bound and a right bound. So I go slightly to the left of my minimum, and then I hit the right button until I get slightly to the right of my minimum. And that gives me two arrows that say I'm going to find the minimum between these 2 points. My guess can be anywhere, and it should find the minimum value. So I get a minimum when x is 1 and y is 9.5 times 10 to the negative 13. So the minimum is 9.5 times 10 to the negative 13, which means 0 followed by like tons of zeros. Oops. And then 9, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Not enough. 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, that should be good. So, such a small number is pretty much 0. So the minimum is 0. And as you can see from the graph goes up towards infinity. So I know that my maximum is infinity. So my range is all the numbers from 0 to infinity. I'm never allowed to equal infinity, so I use a round bracket. But because there is a point at 0, I'm going to use a square bracket for that point. Okay, so that's how to use the minimum function on your calculator. Sometimes you need to be a little bit smarter than your calculator by knowing that the number is close to 0, even though it's not written exactly as 0. So for example 2, let's try to graph y equals 3x squared plus 6 over x squared minus 2x minus 3. And again, to find the domain, we really want to factor the denominator, because that will give us the vertical asymptotes. So we get x minus 3 and x plus 1. So the vertical asymptotes are whatever will make the denominator equal to 0. So 3 or negative 1. And as soon as we know the vertical asymptotes, we also know the domain. You're not allowed to equal the vertical asymptotes. But the range is much harder. We need to look at the picture to find the range. So let's graph it out and see if we were right about the domain, and then find the range. So again, we need to put brackets around the top and the bottom of the fraction. It doesn't matter which version you use, the factored version or the non-factored version, but you need extra brackets around the top and the bottom when you graph it. So there's our asymptote at negative 1 and our asymptote at 3. Those vertical lines are the asymptotes. So we did a great job with the domain. Now the range is, what is the smallest number that y can be? We can see that the graph goes all the way down to negative infinity. So now we want to know, what can we go up to? Well, we go up to this point right here. So we go from negative infinity all the way up to this point. Then do we skip any numbers? It looks like we skip a whole bunch until we get to this graph. This graph looks like it is the next part where we start. So we want to find out, what's the highest point here and what's the lowest point here? So we go from highest to lowest and then we go up to infinity. So let's find the maximum of that upside down u. So we calculate the maximum. We put the left bound, so we go slightly to the left of the max, hit enter. Then we go slightly to the right of the max, hit enter, and then hit enter one more time. And you get a maximum of negative 1.779211. So the range goes all the way from negative infinity to negative whatever that number was, 1.779211. We are allowed to equal that number because there is a point there. Okay, now we have to figure out, where do we start again? So it kind of looks like this might be the lowest point, but I don't know if it gets lower on this side. So I'm just going to change my window so that I can see a little bit more of the right-hand side. Well, it looks pretty close to 3. Does it go below that? It doesn't really look like it. So let's actually calculate, again, the minimum of the left side and see if it gets any lower than 3. Okay, so I choose a left bound, and then I go slightly to the right of my minimum. I choose a right bound, and I hit enter, and it'll find me the lowest point on this left side. There it is, 2.52. So it does get lower than 3. So I start again at 2.529211. Going all the way to infinity. Now I'm going to check just in case and see if that number can be written as a fraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit this window. I'm going to go to my main menu and I'm going to type y by hitting alpha and then the number 1. I'm going to hit enter and it saves that number. I want to see, is this a fraction? So I'm going to go to my math menu and try to write it as a fraction. And nothing happens. So probably it can't be written as a fraction. I could do the same thing with the second number, but it doesn't look very fractionable to me. So again, to change a number to a fraction, we would go to our graph. First you calculate. Let's do this again for the U section. upside down U. There it is. So we go left, hit enter, go to the right of the maximum, hit enter, and hit enter one more time. It finds the max, which is negative, and we quit. We hit alpha 1 to get y. Saves the y value, and then we go to the math menu and hit to fraction to see if it can make it in a fraction. If nothing happens, that's it. We'll leave it as a decimal. Okay, so that's how you can find the domain and range of a rational function using your TI-83 calculator.